Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking academic theory and bringing it into the real world. We're going to look at three massive historical examples to really get to the bottom of what a diaspora actually is. We hear the word thrown around all the time, right? Especially as the world gets more connected. But we're going to peel back the layers and look at the actual, real-world frameworks that define how human beings maintain their identity when they're scattered all across the globe.
But right out of the gate, let's just shatter a pretty huge misconception. Is every single migrant group automatically a diaspora? The short answer? No, definitely not. If you pack up your stuff and move to another country, you don't instantly form a diaspora. It takes a whole lot more than just crossing a border to build one. And that's exactly why we need a proper analytical lens to figure out what's really going on here. So here's how we're breaking it down today. First, what makes a diaspora? Second, the original Jewish diaspora. Third, trade and labor with the Chinese diaspora. Fourth, forced displacement and the African diaspora. And finally, we'll wrap up by comparing all three.
Section 1. What makes a diaspora?
Okay, let's dive into this. To build our framework, we're relying on top scholars in the field, like Robin Cohen. Cohen actually broke diasporas down into 5 distinct types. And what's really fascinating is that these categories are based entirely on why people left their homes in the first place. You've got victim diasporas, like Jews and Armenians, who were forcibly pushed out. Then there are imperial groups, like the British colonists sent out to run an empire. You also have labor diaspora.
So how do we separate a true diaspora from just, a group of travelers? Well, this brings us to another scholar, Gabriel Scheffer, and his test. Basically, if you're a tourist or a short-term guest worker, you fail this test. Being part of a diaspora requires a conscious, ongoing choice. You have to actively organize around a shared ethnic or national identity, build actual institutions, and stay connected with your homeland and your kin in other parts of the world. It isn't just about where you live, it's an active, daily choice of identity.
And please, don't mistake this for just simple cultural nostalgia. These groups hold immense real-world political power. Just look at this number. 2%. At one point, the nation of Eritrea actually taxed its immigrants 2% of their income to help fund a war back home. Think about that for a second. That is a highly tangible, incredibly powerful connection that reaches right across international borders. Or take a look at this staggering figure, $30 million. Croatia's diaspora managed to raise roughly $30 million to fund its fight for independence. They were literally so pivotal to the creation of the country that the diaspora was later rewarded with 12 reserved seats in Croatia's 120-seat parliament. No way, right? It just goes to show how diasporas actively shape hardcore politics, not just food and culture.
Part 2. The original, the Jewish diaspora.
Now, the historical timeline of the Jewish people is defined by repeated forced displacement. Starting way back in ancient history, in 720 BCE, the Assyrians scattered Israel's elite. Then, in 586 BCE, the Babylonians conquered and dispersed even more Jews. Though, as a quick aside, Babylon actually became this thriving hub of Jewish culture later on. Jump to 66 to 70 CE, and the Romans destroy the temple in Jerusalem, pushing Jews to spread out across Europe, where they faced brutal medieval persecution. And then, history kind of pauses to recognize the profound horrors of the Holocaust from 1939 to 1945, where Nazi Germany's genocide claimed roughly 12 million Jewish lives. The survivors scattered, mostly to the Americas and Palestine, which ultimately paved the way for the creation of the modern state of Israel in 1948. This history is literally where the capital D word diaspora comes from. In fact, older dictionaries used to define the word specifically as the Jewish dispersal. They are the absolute classic example of what scholars classify as a victim diaspora and also a state-linked group. They're the archetype because they manage this truly incredible human achievement, keeping an unbroken thread of homeland identity and kinship alive across thousands of years of exile, which eventually resulted in the establishment of a real nation-state.
Section 3. Trade and labor, the Chinese diaspora.
The sheer scale of this group is just breathtaking. We are looking at an estimated population of 33 to 35 million people worldwide. Now, just a quick caveat on the data here, all diaspora population numbers are estimates. Different host countries count who belongs using different ethnic, religious, or linguistic criteria. But honestly, by any metric you use, the Chinese diaspora is one of the largest on the planet. What's really fascinating here is how the nature of the migration evolved over time. It kicked off centuries ago with Ming Dynasty trade voyages and early settlements in Southeast Asia. Then, jumping to the 17th to 19th centuries, colonial powers needed cheap labor. This sparked the coolie trade, where an estimated 6.3 million indentured men left through Hong Kong alone. A lot of these laborers actually saw themselves as sojourners. They planned to make some money and go back home, which kept their nostalgia and their ties to the homeland incredibly strong. Later on, they faced some really harsh, racist exclusion policies in countries like the US and Australia starting in the 1880s, before a post-World War II wave brought a whole new influx of skilled professionals and students over to the West.
And this brilliantly illustrates a key concept. The experience of a diaspora isn't uniform at all. It is heavily shaped by the host country. For example, in Thailand, Chinese communities largely intermarried and smoothly assimilated right into the local culture. But if you look just next door in Malaysia and Singapore, they maintained a very strong, fiercely distinct ethnic identity. It just proves that a diaspora's survival depends on a really complex dance with the culture they happen to land in.
Moving on to Section 4, Forced Displacement, the African Diaspora.
The origin of this diaspora is rooted in profound historical trauma. In stark contrast to trade and labor migrations, this group was primarily formed through the transatlantic slave trade. This forcibly scattered millions of Africans across the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe. It was a brutal displacement that created a massive global population, but crucially, it was one disconnected from any single unified historical nation-state that they could look back on.
Because of this totally unique history, modern institutions have to define this group differently. The African Union officially defines the diaspora as people of African origin living outside the continent, regardless of citizenship, who are willing to contribute to Africa's development. Did you notice how it's not based on holding a specific national passport? It's based entirely on shared ancestry, a consciousness of belonging, and a willingness to contribute. This creates a uniquely complex identity. There isn't just one single shared origin story here, and Africa itself is definitely not one homogeneous culture. Plus, when you look at today's African diaspora, it also includes modern voluntary migrants and refugees, layering brand new experiences right over the old ones. Because this group never had one clear historical homeland state to begin with, it kind of challenges all the easy academic classifications we've talked about so far.
Let's move to and see how this builds as we transition to synthesizing our academic theory with our 3 historical landscapes. Part 5, Comparing the 3 Diasporas.
Okay, looking at this matrix, if we put on our armchair sociologist hats for a second, you can clearly see how the term diaspora represents vastly different human experiences. The Jewish diaspora was caused by forced exile, maintains a very strong state link today, and is your classic victim category. Then you have the Chinese diaspora, driven by trade and labor. They maintain cultural and ethnic ties rather than direct state dependence, fitting neatly into the trade/labor category. And finally, the African diaspora, stemming from forced enslavement. They maintain a looser tie based on shared ancestry and history rather than a single state, and fall into the stateless victim diaspora category. 3 totally different patterns, all wrapped up in one unifying concept.
I want to leave you all with a thought from our source material that perfectly captures just how complex this gets. Imagine a West African person who is enslaved, taken to Jamaica, and then later in life is moved to Britain. Are they African? Are they Jamaican? Are they English? Their layered, forced journey shapes an identity that simply cannot be reduced to one neat, tidy label. And honestly, that is the true, incredibly human complexity behind the academic study of diasporas. It is not just about geography. It is about the resilience of identity itself. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the world around you.